I let my father and his new wife stay at my place when they were going through financial difficulties and had nowhere else to go. But just a month later, his wife started insisting that I pay them monthly rent to live in my own home. It wasn't just absurd, it was deeply insulting. I was 15 the last time I tried to celebrate my birthday. I didn't want anything extravagant, just a movie night with a few friends and maybe some pizza. But when I approached my dad and quietly asked for a little money, he looked at me like I'd just spat in his face. "You serious?" he said. "This isn't your day. This is the day your mother died." I remember stepping back like I'd been slapped. He went on, not raising his voice, but every word hit harder than if he'd screamed. "You were born, and she died. You think you have the right to celebrate that?" I didn't go to the movies. I sat in the kitchen staring out the window as it got dark. It felt like all the warmth inside me had drained out. From that day on, I stopped expecting anything good from him. Though, if I'm being honest, there was never much to expect in the first place. My mom died giving birth to me. I didn't learn this from gentle stories or quiet family conversations. I learned it from the way my dad threw it in my face like a curse. He said my birth ruined his life, that I took away the only person who mattered to him. He never called me sweetheart or baby girl, just burden. Living with him felt like walking a minefield. Every word, every glance, every action could trigger the next explosion. He never hit me. He did worse. With words. So many of them. And they stayed with me, buried deeper than I realized. I tried. So hard. I was top of my class, brought home awards, perfect grades, glowing teacher notes. I buried every part of myself that didn't fit his version of acceptable, hoping one day he'd see me and say something kind. That I mattered. That I wasn't a mistake. But he never changed. He'd glance at my report card and scoff. "So what? Hundreds of kids get these grades. You're not special." Whenever I tried to do anything outside of school, dance, theater, anything that made me feel alive, he'd shut it down immediately. "Money isn't for fun. Study harder. Move out faster. This isn't your house." I truly felt like a guest in my own home. He never let me have friends over, never let me enjoy myself. Every Sunday, I'd ask for a little freedom, just a walk or some air. And he'd remind me, "You eat on my dime. You use my electricity. And you think you deserve fun?" But the worst part wasn't the control. It was the silence. The silence when I cried into my pillow, hoping he'd just once knock on the door, check on me, see me. But he never did. He never really saw me. By 15, I had stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped believing. But part of me still wanted to believe. I kept thinking, maybe if I just worked a little harder, he'd finally notice, accept me, want me. That desperate hope didn't die quickly. It clung to me like a shadow. That night, my last birthday, I wrote in my journal, maybe I really was a mistake. Maybe if I hadn't been born, everything would have been better. I never wrote in that journal again, and I never celebrated another birthday. I survived the best I could, more like endured. Every day felt like a mission. Stay unnoticed, don't provoke, don't mess up. My dad never hit me, but I feared him deeply. Sometimes just the sound of his footsteps down the hallway sent a chill through me. School became my lifeline. It was the only place I felt remotely safe. There, no one looked at me with disgust. Teachers praised me. Friends invited me to parties, even though I almost never went. He didn't allow it. But just being invited mattered. Someone wanted me around. That was enough to get through another day. I started working at 16. First at a cafe after school, then in a warehouse over the summer. I saved every penny. Secretly. I didn't spend a dime. That was my only way out. My escape plan. I dreamed of college the way some people dream of rescue. Freedom. A new life. A life where I didn't have to tiptoe around my own father. A life where no one reminded me I was a mistake. When the letter came saying I'd been accepted to one of the top universities with a full scholarship, I didn't believe it at first. I stood there holding the envelope, crying, not from joy, but from a strange relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared. I could see the exit. My father didn't say a word. He just muttered, "Doesn't mean anything. Everyone leaves, and everyone comes crawling back. You will too once you realize you can't handle it." I didn't respond. I just kept packing. The day I left was quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back. He stood on the porch, arms crossed, stone-faced. No good luck. No be safe. Just silence. I knew that if I looked over my shoulder, I'd regret it. So I didn't. I shut the door behind me. The first months in college were strange. I didn't know how to live without fear. I didn't know how to make choices for myself. What to eat, who to talk to, where to go. It felt like someone had taken off a suit of armor I'd worn my whole life. But my body still remembered the weight. I studied, took on campus jobs, freelanced online. I still saved most of my money. Habit. But for the first time, I let myself spend a little. Coffee with friends, movie tickets, a sweater I liked just because. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't a shadow. And then I met Nicole. She didn't crash into my life. She flowed into it. Calm, focused, steady. I wasn't used to someone looking at me with curiosity, not expectation. We met in an elective course, talked first about projects, then books, movies, childhood. Though, I stayed quiet about mine for a while. Nicole was the first person who didn't pressure me to open up, but somehow her presence made it feel okay if I did. The first time I mentioned not having birthday photos, she didn't ask questions, just nodded and offered to help me celebrate the next one, however I wanted. It felt awkward. I didn't know how to accept kindness. Every gesture felt suspicious, temporary, like it must come with a cost. But Nicole never demanded anything. She was just there. Over time, I began breathing deeper, learning to live differently, without fear, without guilt. But the past still clung to me, like a splinter under the skin, never letting the wound heal. I didn't know what to do with it. And Nicole, with that same steady tone, once said, "Maybe you should try therapy?" I'd never considered it. In my head, therapy meant something was wrong with you, like a failure. But she just nodded and said, "There's nothing wrong with you. You just weren't given the right things to grow." I booked an appointment, and at that very first session, I said out loud, "My dad always blamed me for my mother's death. He told me that directly. I thought I deserved it." I didn't know where to start. That first session felt like a blur. I sat across from the woman, listened to her calm voice, and everything inside me screamed, "You don't deserve help." But I stayed, and I came back. With every session, I started to realize just how much of someone else's grief had been handed to me. Grief that was never mine to carry, but had become my lifelong burden. My father couldn't process his pain, so he passed it on to me, as if that was fair. He didn't mourn my mother. He punished me for her death. And I had lived with that for so long, I thought it was normal. I said it out loud. Slowly, quietly, with pauses. For the first time in my life, I didn't defend him. I didn't try to make excuses. I just described what happened. No sugarcoating. Then the dreams started. I'd wake up sweating like I was back in that house, a teenager again. In my dreams, I could hear his voice. The same words, again and again. "You caused her death. You should have tried harder. You're a burden." Nicole held my hand when I woke up. Sometimes silently, sometimes whispering that I was safe. And I believed her. I wasn't able to believe myself yet. But I believed her. After a few months of therapy, I started to feel angry. At first, I thought that anger was wrong. I had spent so many years training myself to be quiet, agreeable, obedient. But now I understood. This anger wasn't destructive. It was saving me. It was the voice I had silenced my whole life. The voice that had always wanted to scream, "You can't treat me like this." I tried to keep some kind of contact with my father. Occasionally. We talked on the phone once or twice a month. He was dry, mechanical, asked about school. I answered, and every time I felt irritation rising in my chest. He never apologized, never once said he regretted anything. For him, nothing had changed. He still thought he was right. Still spoke as if I owed him something. One day, I snapped. We were talking on the phone and he made another offhand remark. Something about me being ungrateful, how I'd forgotten who gave you a roof over your head. And I just cracked. Not yelling, but clear, steady, deliberate. I told him everything, how his words broke me, how I grew up thinking I was a curse, how every "you're to blame" cut into me like a knife, how I was afraid of my own birthday, how I used to dream of disappearing. He was silent. I hoped, just for a second, that he'd say something, try to understand. But all he did was sigh and say, "Everyone has a hard childhood." I ended the call. I never called him again. I couldn't. Therapy continued, and I started talking more about the present, about how I was learning to choose myself. Not because I wanted to be selfish, but because for the first time I realized I had the right to. The world felt bigger. I didn't see it as a battlefield anymore. I saw it as a space where I was allowed to exist, calmly, safely. I no longer flinched at doorbells, no longer froze at a man's voice on the phone. I knew I wasn't that girl anymore. I was stronger, wiser. I didn't forgive my father. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever will. But I stopped looking for that forgiveness inside myself. I realized I don't need to forgive him to be free. And just when I was living my new life, building a career, nurturing my relationship, breathing deeply, he came back. He called, said he was in trouble, said he was on the edge, said he had nowhere else to go. And I froze, like all those years had never passed. When he called, his voice didn't sound humbled. It sounded scared. He spoke quickly, nervously, circling the same phrases. That he had nowhere to live, that he was drowning in debt, that he couldn't tell his wife, that he was completely alone. I listened in silence. My hands felt numb with tension. I hadn't expected to hear from him again, especially not like this. He didn't ask directly, but it wasn't subtle either. He knew I wasn't the type to turn away, and I'm sure he was counting on the same old play. Guilt, pity, obligation. I told him I wouldn't give him money. I had worked too hard to build my life, and I wasn't about to become his safety net again. But then, I spoke with Nicole. She didn't pressure me, she didn't say I should help. She simply asked, if it were a stranger, someone you didn't know, would you let them stay for a little while? I thought about it. If it had been anyone else, maybe I would have. The next day, I called him back. I told him he and his wife could stay at my place temporarily until they got back on their feet. I laid out the conditions clearly. This wasn't a gift. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was a time-limited act of human decency, and only if my boundaries were respected. He hesitated, said he'd think about it. 2 days later, he called again and accepted. I prepared the guest room for them, set it up with what they'd need, left clear notes. I wanted to be polite but distant. No illusions. No attempt to be the daughter he once never wanted. The first month passed quietly. A bit of tension, a bit of polite detachment. We mostly avoided each other. He spent time in the living room reading or watching TV. She cooked, sometimes tidied up. We didn't argue. That already felt like a miracle. But peace never lasts long. He started making comments. At first, casual, friendly, even, about cleaning, the food, my habits. Then more pointed. You come home too late. You spend too much time with Nicole. You don't take care of the house. His tone grew increasingly familiar. I felt my body start to tense at the sound of his footsteps, like I was a teenager all over again. I told him calmly that I wouldn't tolerate that tone, that this was my home, that I didn't owe him anything. He went quiet. For a while. That's when things took a strange turn. His wife, Diane, began talking about his supposed contribution. At first, offhand. You should be grateful for everything he did for you. Then more directly. He helped with this house, and you act like he's a stranger. I didn't understand what she meant at first. Until one evening she said, you live in a house your father helped you buy. Maybe it's time you start paying him back. Through rent? I froze. And then I laughed, out loud. She didn't get why. I left the kitchen, came back with a folder of documents, and calmly placed a copy of the title deed in front of her. My name. Just mine. He hadn't contributed a cent. She stared at the paper for a long time, then looked up, and I saw it in her eyes. A mixture of anger and shame. I said evenly, next time you ask for money, you might want to check who owns the roof over your head. The next day, her things were gone. My father called me that evening. He was furious. He was yelling into the phone. Not because I lied, but because I told the truth. He blamed me for ruining his marriage, for making him look like a liar, for making Diane feel uncomfortable. You could have kept your mouth shut. You were supposed to protect me, he shouted. I don't protect lies, especially not lies from someone who spent decades breaking me down from the inside. I reminded him that he was a guest in my home, and I wasn't the one who misled his wife. That was his choice, to lie in order to get what he wanted. He hung up. No goodbye. But I knew. It wasn't over. The next day, he didn't show up in the kitchen, didn't leave his room. I could hear him pacing, slamming doors, having hushed, frustrated phone calls. I didn't get involved. I had upheld my part of the deal. I offered temporary shelter. That didn't mean I had to clean up the fallout of his lies. Eventually, he emerged. He looked at me with an odd expression, a mix of resentment, disappointment, and something childishly wounded. He sat at the table and said he wanted to talk. that he hadn't expected me to kick out his wife so easily, that I'd been cruel. I listened, emotionless, then said, I didn't kick her out. I told the truth. She chose to leave, and I understand why. He went quiet, then shrugged and muttered, Women always make everything complicated. That was all I needed to hear to know. Nothing had changed. He hadn't processed anything. He hadn't learned a thing. He still took no responsibility. For a week, he stayed quiet, distant. Sometimes he left for hours, sometimes came back late at night. I didn't ask where he went. It wasn't my concern anymore. But then the cycle restarted. He began criticizing my habits again, saying I acted like I owned the place, forgetting who was the elder, that I had become arrogant, that I thought I was better than him just because I had a house and he didn't. And that's when I knew. It was time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, remembering everything. How hard I'd tried to earn his attention, the guilt I carried, the silence I lived in. All the ways I twisted myself to be easy, to be tolerable. Everything I had endured. I had come too far to let this shadow back into my life. The next morning, I knocked on his door. He answered in his pajamas, groggy. I said calmly, You need to move out. Tomorrow. He didn't get it at first. Then started arguing. Said he had nowhere to go, no money, that I was selfish. That no decent child would ever do this. That I was humiliating him. I listened. Calm. Not angry. Not sad. Just tired. I'm not your crutch. I'm not going to keep paying for your mistakes. You're an adult, and you can't live in my house anymore. He slammed the door, shouted something back, but I didn't hear it. I went to the kitchen, made myself coffee, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe freely. That evening, he left. I don't know where he went. He didn't say goodbye. And honestly, this time that was for the best. After he left, the house went quiet. Not that tense silence where you're afraid to breathe too loudly. Real silence. Calm, soft. I woke up the next morning and realized I wasn't anxious. Not in my body, not in my head. It felt like I had finally exhaled after years of holding my breath. Nicole made tea. We sat in the kitchen without talking. No conversations, no processing, just silence. I realized I couldn't remember the last time silence didn't feel threatening. It no longer meant yelling was coming. It felt safe. In the following weeks, I felt like I was being rebuilt from the inside. My days became lighter. I wasn't checking my phone for calls. I didn't flinch at footsteps near the door. I started to feel the space around me. My life. No lies. No fear. He called, left voicemails, sometimes angry, sometimes pitiful. Once he even said I had ruined his life. That my mother would be ashamed of me. I didn't reply. I deleted every message. Not out of hatred, but out of self-preservation. I didn't need to hear it anymore. Therapy continued. We started talking not just about the past, but how to live now. Without guilt. Without the habit of being agreeable. I was learning how to say no and not explain myself. Learning not to justify why I was choosing myself. It was new. Unfamiliar. But necessary. One day, I told my therapist I felt both free and empty. Like something that had always been there. Pain, anger, tension, was gone, and nothing was left. She nodded and said, That's not emptiness. That's space. And now you get to fill it with what you choose. So I planned a trip. Just a weekend getaway. Nicole and I rented a cabin by the lake, far from the city. No service, no schedule. We went on walks, cooked dinner, sat by the fire, stayed quiet. And once again, the silence felt gentle. Not cold. For the first time in ages, I laughed. Really laughed. Not politely, not tiredly, not forced. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. And that night, lying on a warm blanket, I thought, this is life. The kind I never had. But always wanted. Going back to the city didn't scare me. I wasn't afraid of myself anymore. I wasn't afraid of my decisions, my feelings, my boundaries. I didn't owe anyone anything. Not even my father. And there was no cruelty in that. Only freedom. A few days later, he called again. I didn't pick up. He sent a message. Sorry, I was wrong. I don't know how to do better. I read it. Not right away. I didn't reply. Forgiveness doesn't always mean letting someone back in. Sometimes, I forgive you is the end, not the beginning. I no longer waited for him to change. I wasn't hoping for acknowledgement. I didn't dream of being the daughter he was proud of. I wasn't starving for what he could never give. I was just living. I didn't reply to that message, not because I was angry, but because I didn't feel like I needed to. We often talk about forgiveness like it's a door you're supposed to open, but sometimes it's just a wall you leave something behind. Not to revisit it, just to stop carrying it forward. A few months passed. Spring turned into summer. I was working, finally developing a project I'd been wanting to start for a while. In the evenings, Nicole and I would cook dinner together, talk about movies, go for walks. I can't remember ever feeling this stable. And then he reached out again. No accusations this time, no pity, just a request. He wrote that he'd lost everything, that Diane had left him for good, that he was alone and didn't know what to do, that he wanted to talk. Not as father and daughter, as adults. I didn't know what to expect. He knew where I lived, but he hadn't shown up. He wasn't pushing, just asking. I thought, fine, one conversation, in a public place. We met at a cafe near my office. He looked tired. His face had aged, and he wore that same expression I remembered from childhood. Pride mixed with the fear of being vulnerable. He started talking, not with blame, with memories, about my mom, about how her loss broke him, how he couldn't cope, how he started seeing the child not as what was left of love, but as the cause of his pain. He wasn't making excuses. He just talked. I didn't cry. I didn't comfort him. I just listened. Then he said he was afraid of dying alone, that he realized how badly he'd ruined everything, that he tried to start over with Diane, but destroyed that too, because he didn't know how to be different. And now he didn't know why to keep going. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see a monster, or a villain, or the source of my pain. I saw a man. Broken, lonely, lost. I didn't pity him. I didn't want to save him. But I felt calm. When he asked for another chance, not to move back in, not to be dad and daughter again, but just a chance to call once in a while. I thought about it for a long time. Then I nodded. One call a month. No requests, no pressure, no lies. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. I'm not that little girl anymore, desperately trying to earn love. I'm a grown woman who can set boundaries and decide who gets to enter her life and who doesn't. Since then, he calls sometimes. We don't talk long. He asks how I'm doing, tells me he saw a doctor, that he's been reading, that he makes his own breakfast now. It's not closeness. It's a safe distance. One I can breathe in. Sometimes Nicole asks, "Do you ever regret not cutting him off completely?" I smile. Number, I just don't expect anything from him anymore. Not love, not understanding, not care. And without those expectations, even the voice of the past sounds quieter. I've thought a lot about what the ending to this story would be, and whether there even is one. As a kid, I imagined one version. My father would repent, admit the pain he caused, hug me, and say he loved me. As a teenager, another version. He'd disappear from my life forever, and I'd live freely, never looking back. In therapy, they told me life isn't a movie. There's no perfect ending. There's just the path. And you, walking it. I stopped living for the ending. I started living because I finally stopped living for someone else's expectations. When I look back, I don't pity that girl. I want to hug her, but not out of sympathy. She was strong, too strong for her age, and I'm grateful to her for surviving, for not giving up, for not becoming like him. My life now, it's not perfect. I still catch myself trying to be agreeable. I still fear being too emotional. I still work on not apologizing for what I feel, but I've learned to notice it, to pause, to choose myself, even if that's inconvenient for others. I work. I'm building something of my own. I'm in a relationship where I'm not asked to change, where I'm loved, not for good behavior, but simply for being me. I laugh, often, easily. I drink coffee in the morning without bracing for someone to come in and shatter the peace. Sometimes he calls. Sometimes I answer. We talk for 2 minutes. I invest nothing beyond courtesy. This isn't reconciliation. It's a boundary. One built not on fear, but on respect for myself. Not long ago, I asked myself, if I had the chance to go back and rewrite something, what would I change? Maybe I'd choose a different family. A mom who stayed, a dad who knew how to love, a childhood without pain. But then, maybe, I wouldn't be me. I wouldn't know how to feel someone else's pain. I wouldn't know how to hold someone's hand. I wouldn't value silence. I wouldn't understand the weight of kindness. Maybe my story didn't start with love, but with loss. But now it's about choice, growth, freedom. Nicole once said to me, "You don't have to be the hero of your trauma. You can be the author of your life." And more, I feel like that's exactly what I'm becoming. I don't have neat answers, no universal lessons. I don't know the right way to forgive or what to do with parents who never figured it out. But I do know this. Living doesn't mean enduring. Enduring doesn't mean loving. And love, real love, is not something you earn. Love begins where fear ends.